Okay, so on page 76 of your packet through page 90 is the completed performance evaluation that you all did for my year that coincides with my completion of my second year of employment at PSTA. There is, at your places, is a revised action item. A revised action language under this item. The change that I'm recommending is a change to the Personnel Committee's recommendation to award me, in addition to a 1% increase in my salary, a one-time $750 merit-based lump sum amount. However, I have been thankfully notified by PSTA's attorney that we can't do that until PSTA has a policy in place that governs the allocation of one-time lump sum amounts. And the state law requires that any distribution of one-time lump sum amounts must be per a policy that ensures that all employees in that same class of employee are eligible for the same type of lump sum amount. So we are busy working on this policy, and hopefully we'll have a personnel committee that can review it, and then it comes back to you next month. We've been talking, it's not here anymore, we've been talking with our labor unions, because we're proposing to do this for all 565 employees of PSTA, that everyone, and we'll have one overarching policy that we don't have yet. So, again, I am grateful and thankful that so many of you, I think 14 out of 15 perhaps, or 13 out of 15, filled it out and gave me great feedback, and I am honored to be here, and it's great. And thanks to Larry cutting the health insurance for families, maybe my $750 thing will be a wash. And that's perfectly fine. One clarification, the budget that you have not approved yet, but is going to come to you September 4th at your public hearing for the first time, includes a 1% increase across the board for all employees. So this 1% that I'm recommending here is that 1%. I would receive it just like all employees on the October 1. It's not an additional 1% or anything like that.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public left? Okay. Is there a motion on the floor? Okay, and just as chair of the Personnel Committee, we did review this, and we'll note a pretty good rating of 4.49 average out of 5. So Brad's doing a good job according to his board. Comments, Mr. Johnson?
Thank you. I'd just like to clarify in my own mind the attorney's recommendation with the budget and this. As I understand the budget, it has a 1%. Did it not also have a merit proposal that was going to be in the contracts, that was going to be developed?
It does for fiscal year 2014,
Which is the one coming up.
right.
So
I'll be back next summer with you can rate me again and suggest in compliance with the new policy we'll have by then.
And the new policy will probably be presented to us next month.
Yeah.
So, because we have a commitment to our union that we would include the lump sum performance rating in our current contract or next year's contract.
There's no obligation within our contracts for the lump sum amount. The contracts do have the 1% that we are budgeting, but the lump sum is additional to the contracts. There's some language in the contracts that do require us to have discussions with the union about merit-based compensation, but no particular obligation on it.
That was what I wanted to have cleared up. And the reason for this, is this a recent legislative change? Because some boards gave huge amounts and,
About 2 or 3 years ago, that the legislature changed the statute. It's the same time that they changed the statute that limited severance pay for executives. They also included a provision that required a policy to be adopted, that it be performance-based or standards to be set forth, and then they be shared with all employees that would be eligible for any extra compensation. It's part of that same bill that limited severance pay.
and just, since I'm before, I'd like to thank Brad. And I think that he has brought huge improvements to PSTA, and I'm very happy to see this.
Any other comments, questions?
Yes. Yes.
Any other? Commissioner Wojciechowski?
I just want to thank Brad for the hard work that he's done this year. A couple of the key things that I thought were pretty amazing during his last year. I think he did a really remarkable job in creating the subcommittee structure that we now have with the Finance and Planning, or the Finance and Performance Management Committee, the Planning Committee, the Legislative Committee, the Employee Committee, Personnel Committee, and so on and so forth. I think that has given the opportunity, given the fact we only meet once a month, it's given the opportunity for almost all board members to get a first bite at the apple, if you will, to get some of their questions out, which also then in turn gives staff the time to follow up on and correct and change positions if needed prior to coming to our board meetings. It has also, I think, made our board meetings, for the most part, much more efficient by having that first vetting. So I think that was a big win. So, call it what you will, organizational leadership. I think that was a really good thing. I'm pretty excited about the fact that you joined the consortium. You're doing the benchmarking program with similar transportation systems. I know that probably Finance and Performance has maybe seen something or going to see something, but I'd love for all of us to be able to see some of that. I think it's important to understand where we rate. We don't have to have a big discussion, but just shoot us some information. But I'm glad that you've done that to help us see how we do stand up.
I'm glad some of my staff is here to hear that, because they're not so excited. Thank you.
I am. And I think Brad has stepped into a huge leadership role with a highly active and strongly opinionated board. And he has to, yes. Well, no, I'm glad that we are, because I don't want us to be rubber stampers.
Right.
And I don't think he wants us to either. And I don't think it bothers him when we do what we do. And we have a special way of doing it sometimes. But I think that you have a knack for presenting challenging ideas. And you are not afraid to be questioned. You welcome that. It doesn't frustrate you. It doesn't make you defensive. And I think in the line of business that we're in and going through this Greenlight process, that in itself is an exceptional quality that I appreciate, because I want people to question you. I want them to blow you out of the water with questions. And it just doesn't seem to bother you. You get no defensiveness, and you actually listen and change things from the questions that you get. And so those are just a couple of the things that I really appreciate about what you've done this year. And I thank you very much, and I look forward to working with you at home with you.
Thank you. Councilman Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I echo Commissioner Wojciechowski's comments. I can tell you 2 words I can describe Brad in: proactive and forward thinking. I can tell you now, even on the committee level, is looking at trying to have the committees be more diverse to represent the whole county, not just one area. Have all the people on one committee from one area. That is not a true reflection of the board or the county. And I think that's good. I can say these only CEO I was with under in my short term on the board, so I have no one really to compare it to, but I look at it, and when you take on a job that's, you gotta, I guess, it can become enveloped with the job and go out and do things above and beyond. It's easier just to sit up and micromanage and bombard the board with reports to say we're doing this, this, and that, but to get out there and get engaged, and like Commissioner Bogowski says, the V question, I mean, anything factual should withstand scrutiny. If you start asking questions and it falls apart like a house of cards, that's not your fault. Because if I walk like a duck, quack like a duck, and walk like a duck, it's probably a duck. And lastly, I want to thank Rachel. I know that the committee asked about, when we first brought this back, all the comments wasn't categorized by the member. I think this is good in terms of transparency. Also, you can see the rationale by wanting the compensation rate, whatever we're recommending each one of us, how they're backing that up and what rationale they're using based on the standards that we're judging them on. So I appreciate you putting work in for that. Thank you.
Mr. Barkley.
Yes, I just wanted to say I noticed on the sheet that my comments were not included, and I did get a response from Ms. Henderson that I had sent that in. And I concur wholeheartedly. I've been on the board almost a year now, and I've consistently been very pleased with Brad's performance. I've had a chance to interact with him on a couple of presentations on the Greenlight Canals program, and he does a super job on that. I appreciate the way he handles all questions with regard to both positive and negative with regard to the Greenlight Canals program, and look forward to continuing to work with you.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Mr. Chair. Yes, Mr. Rose.
I just want to advise, I agree with many of the comments made, but I'm going to remain consistent with my recommendation on this investor and a vote, but I want to personally, publicly, for the record, assure you that is not reflective of my personal opinion or work. More than that, consistency. I wanted to take a moment to clarify that for the record, personally, publicly. Thank you.
Any other comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Okay.
And our action items, next is information on the green light delivery. Oh, I'm sorry. Take that clock down. Board officers and committee appointments.
So the, on page 91 of your packet is a list of recommendations for the executive leaders of the PSTA board for 2014 for you to approve. They're recommending chairperson be Ken Welch, vice chair Bill Johnson, and secretary treasurer Julie Bajowski. There is a recommendation by the nominating committee that this slate of officers take their recommended roles on January 2nd of 2014. That is a change from the past practice of PSTA where the incoming slate of officers took their seat on October 1. And it's recommended that PSTA change its policy, which we'll have for your approval to change the rules and regulations next month. A change to the policy that says that the officers take their role on January 1. The reasoning that the nominating committee is recommending this is that at least currently, seven of the PSTA board members, the county, the 4 from the county, actually plus the 5th citizen representative, and that includes the 4, and the 3 St. Petersburg representatives all take their seats or change over on January 1. And I think other members from the cities also, I don't think anyone changes on October 1. So it makes sense that if new people coming on the board are changing to be coinciding with the terms of the board members. So that's the recommendation on the chair, vice chair, and secretary. There's some recommended changes or placing of other board members onto the committees. The full rundown of committee members is on page 92, but the recommendation is to add Ms. Patty Johnson to the planning committee, to the legislative committee, adding Janet Long, and whoever the future St. Petersburg council appointee might be, Claire to name later. And then PSTA Park Oversight Committee. This is a new committee that is, I'm thankful for the 5 who have volunteered to participate in discussions with Hart. Patty Johnson, Mark Dyton, Joe Barkley, Wayne Gagin, and Cliff Merce.
Okay, there's no action on this item. There's any questions for Brad?
There is an
There's action on this.
Move approval.
Second.
No, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Commissioner Roach.
Oh.
I know, it's constant. I just wanted, Brad, just go back over that last bullet point, I didn't follow clearly on that. The committee, we're not formally recommending a broad change specific to this.
We're recommending a broad change that permanently, starting with the incoming slate of new officers, that the new officers would be, take their roles on January 1st, rather than October 1st.
Okay, so there's no additional action coming. I thought I heard you say that the formal action is coming next month.
Next month, I think we will have an action item for you to formally approve a change to the PSTA rules and regulations that says the board chair, vice chair, and secretary take their seats on January 1.
There's only the rules provide that they serve a one-year term starting in October. So the recommendation from the nominating committee is that we change the rules to change that they'll take their position, the officers will take the position of January 1 and serve 1 year. And the one thing I wanted to clarify when I did it before was that will these 3, and maybe we need to make this clear, that the 3 that will be taking, 3 officers taking their positions, and that's the will of the board, will serve for 1 year. So that they will serve till December, well, actually, yes, January 1 of next year.
Yeah.
So it's not in the staff memo, I just want to make sure that was clear.
I assume that means.
Yeah, I just want to, I apologize, I'm not totally clear. So what this action is approving the recommendation to change, not the change itself.
So this is approving the actual appointment of each people to the 3 officer positions and to the committees.
Right. And change the term. So there's.
Well, you're changing the 3 officers' term will be changed, which you can do. You can amend you can vary from your rules. Under your rules, you can, but you already go vary from your rules when you appoint your officers, which has been done before. And then if you approve this, we will come back with a resolution to change the rules and regulations to going forward, that all officers of the board will be appointed effective January 1st and serve a 1-year term.
Is that, and I apologize for relating these guys, is that necessary then to do it today, if not do it in one fell swoop with the next? What is the purpose of approving it? Seems to be a so you're asking for us to approve the recommendation to come back and codify it, or are we asking to take the action now and then come back later? We codify it. So what is today's, hypothetically, I apologize, let me finish, Counselor. That's right. So if it happened today, and we approved it, at some point, when we'll kind of try to really get the process down, then let's say it didn't approve or pass formally at the next meeting for any number of reasons. What?
Okay, today you're approving it for these officers, if it's
That's
approved.
Okay.
Okay. The next month you would be approving it for officers in the future going forward. Okay. One of the reasons it's here today is because if you don't want to do this, then the nominating committee needs to go back and come back to you with another recommendation before October 1 as to who's going to be the chair, vice chair, and secretary/treasurer, because their proposal right now to you is that these people take those positions effective January 2nd. So if the majority of the board is not in favor of doing that, the nominating committee's got to go back and do a little bit more work and you'll have.
If I could make a recommendation,
You clarify.
if I could make a recommendation,
Hold on.
Okay. Clarify, thank you.
Councilman Wells.
Well, I'm all in favor of you being chair in perpetuity, quite frankly.
Second.
I just want to know for the record that I did abstain from this process for the chairperson.
I was just going to say, but I think Commissioner Roach is okay. I was just going to say we could take the items separately, saying you've got your slate of officers, and then their term, when the term starts, you can make it two different motions, if that would make you more comfortable. Because ultimately, the action is not to hold up the committee members and that's the number one priority right there. The terms and all of that stuff, that can be handled between now and next month and doesn't have to be if it makes sense.
Okay, do we have a motion on the floor? For the recommendation?
Yes, we did.
I thought we had a motion. I don't recall if there was a second.
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, we do have a motion and a second. My only question, I assume this means you would take office in the first meeting of January. We wouldn't have to come in New Year's Day at 9 o'clock to.
Right, but there are things that have to be changed effective January 2nd, even though you're not here meeting. There are things that need to be signed, there are checks that will be signed, and their names will be changed effective as of January 2nd. So we need the date to be changed, not when the board meeting is, but as of January 2nd. You won't be on the board anymore, so we need the date to be changed, so that checks can be signed.
I know in our city, we actually come in on January 2nd and stop at the booth. If that meant you come in the first meeting of January. Okay. Any other questions? Commissioner Johnson?
Sorry, this got a little more confusing as we started talking about it. The changes to the committees, is that effective immediately? Or will that be effective October 1st, or will it be effective January 1st? I would suggest it be effective immediately.
That's what I
So
was
is that acceptable? Okay. Then we are in effect extending the terms of the three officers for 3 months until January 1. And then effective January 1, we're identifying a different group of officers to be effective.
Correct.
I think that's great.
Now that's clear. It'll be January 1 by the time we approve this. Any other comments? Councilman Evans?
Yes, chair of that committee, the recommendation was to try to let it run concurrently with elected officials when they're elected in those positions with their office terms. So you want the midterm because someone else going to do something crazy and make all kind of adjustments. Seemed to make sense because if they're done midnight December 31st and when it converts over to the first business meeting in January, everything already set. But you have to do this extension of 3 months to get to that point.
Everyone's clear on the motion? Almost.
So I just wanted to state one more thing with council. It is, because Chair Danner, yours turned out, right? You think you were?
January 2nd.
That's when it changes? Okay, cool. Clear enough. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
You got the motion, what we're doing?
I do.
Good.
You didn't have anybody.
None opposed. Okay. Next item. This is the information item, Greenlight, Delivery Plan, Citizens Committee.
Thank you very much, members of the PSTA board. I know that we are running behind schedule, and I'll go quickly on this, but I mean, this is a very important item that will be part of the Greenlight Pinellas plan. again, you have now approved the vision for the Greenlight Pinellas plan that will come back to you at your November meeting. You have approved, and now we will be completing a financial analysis that will provide more information about the implementation phasing of the plan. But there's a whole element that I hear all the time from you and from citizens that I've gone and spoken about how we are going to keep our promise or make all of these visions and plans come to reality in Pinellas County. That separately is a very critical piece. And so we have developed this delivery plan, what we're calling a delivery plan, which encompasses how we essentially keep our promise, but it's how we implement the plans that the voters and ultimately the voters are committing to with their funding. That's a very important part. This has been presented to the ACPT already in this presentation. I'll quickly run through, but we're in the process of drafting it, putting it down on paper. Again, it speaks to the whole Greenlight Pinellas plan to try to be a viable, credible plan, to be accountable and transparent, all the things we've been talking about. We have started having discussions, Alan Zimet and myself, with the county attorney about the specific ballot language that will go on the 2014 ballot. What specifically the words will be that will be on the ballot, and that is an important issue, as you know, from what we just saw down in St. Petersburg, exactly how that works. Many people have asked whether we will have in ballot language, or is there some sort of requirement, or is it important to have some kind of citizen oversight committee. Hillsborough County in 2010 had language about a citizen oversight committee that would oversee the implementation of all of their plans. As you know, the Pinellas County School referendum that was on the ballot just last year for renewal has a committee, has a oversight committee of that property tax. But what the Greenlight delivery plan is more than just an oversight committee, although it will have oversight committees. There is no requirement to have an oversight committee that I can tell, but obviously best practice, and we certainly want to have that. There is no requirement, and at least our recommendation would be that perhaps after we've looked at this, that we do not necessarily put a lot of language in the actual ballot language about an oversight committee. But again, this is about how we deliver on the commitments that we're making now following the referendum, and it is more than just creating a citizen oversight committee. It's about keeping our promise. And one thing that some folks have said today is that there is a level of mistrust, or there are too many ways in this, that too many pitfalls ahead of us that we might run into that will make this very difficult. And how are we addressing? That is what the Greenlight delivery plan is about, how we mitigate, or what backstops we have in our plan to avoid issues that might come up. And the three that I want to touch upon, some that were touched upon today, were cost overruns, federal disapproval, and reducing, or a possibility that we might have to reduce the bus service in order to implement the rail. First on cost overruns. And I have examples from other cities of where you heard today, some of these examples have come up. In Charlotte, where I worked, during the implementation of their rail, they had substantial challenges with cost escalation of concrete and steel right during the construction phase of that project, and project scope creep, where a lot of elements after the sales tax was passed in Charlotte in 1998, with no alternative analysis and very limited plan, a committee of 100 led by the mayor, and minimal amounts of plans. Obviously, there was a lot of requests and demands for more service and changes. My picture shows the Charlotte Light Rail, and if you look to the right on that picture, there is a beautiful wrought iron fence and a bike trail that now goes down the entire 9-mile corridor, or I think almost all 9 miles. None of that was in the original project estimate to have that fence and the bike trail, but that got added later. And it's great, the citizens love it, but that increased the cost. And those sorts of elements will undoubtedly happen, they already are happening here, in our plan. What we're doing to mitigate and manage that undoubted impact of cost overruns is, number one, the completed alternative analysis has substantial contingency. The cost estimates that were included in that plan that now we're going to get validated again by the HNTB and Ernst & Young has more than a 20% overall cost estimate contingency built in it already to start. Number two, largely because of Charlotte, the Federal Transit Administration now has a very elaborate, what they call a risk assessment, where they require your city to go through, where they hire consultants, including Ernst & Young, to come to your city and evaluate your particular situation and what you are most at risk to having cost overruns. Is it real estate for property acquisition? Is it, concrete and steel, or is it something else that your community or your project is most at risk? And they give you a rating, and you have to have plans and procedures in place to mitigate that risk. Well, last but not least, we are looking at the possibility of some use of public-private partnerships, like Denver has done, where they have saved money by doing a P3, where they've basically done a RFP and said, we want a rail to the airport. Who's the low bidder? And that's how they're building a rail to the airport through a public-private partnership. It's all sales tax based, but they were able to get lower prices. There's other examples of where one of the key factors in this whole plan is to get approval of our plans from state and federal grants. The capital program is going to require some participation by the feds and the state. Down in Miami, they promised 89 miles of rail in a 2002 referendum. That passed. A 1% sales tax for transit passed in Miami, still is there. And they are only able to build 2.4 miles. They have completed and built a lovely 2.4 mile extension to the airport and a $5 billion Miami International Airport intermodal center there. But their plans were quite a bit different there. And between 2002 and present, a lot of things happened in Miami that caused that to occur. They built a government center that does house the transit operations, but is also their entire county and government center with the transit dollars. That spent a lot of money on that. The economy went down, so they had to had much less funding than they planned on. And the FTA, they had not done any alternative analysis or talked really to FTA. A lot of their rail corridors were not viable, and the feds told them after the fact. All those things I just described, we have mitigating solutions to help us with those kind of issues coming up in our project. We have completed a very robust alternative analysis that we have been meeting and presented to FTA, and FTA has actually called it out as a model for other alternatives, much more detailed analysis than others they have seen. In addition, we have a conservative estimate of the federal and state requirements that essentially is another $400 million contingency in our budget for this project, by assuming that the state and federal government will only provide 50% rather than 75% of the money, like they're doing on Sunrail in Fort Lauderdale and Charlotte and other places. We have a substantial contingency that perhaps if we receive less federal funding than we're hoping to receive, we can still accommodate and come through with our plans. And last but not least, I spoke a little bit about this interlocal agreement with the county that is going to govern the sales tax. That is where the mechanism is in place to eliminate the PSTA property tax. It also is the mechanism in place to ensure that the money doesn't get spent on something that the PSTA board doesn't want it to be spent on, some other project. I mean, unless it comes to PSTA board for approval, it will not be spent. And that, there's nothing in place like that in Miami. Yeah.
Are we pursuing, through our legislative delegation, the same kind of legislation that I think Senator Lafayette sponsored last time to eliminate the PSTA property tax? Are we pursuing that now?
We did not pursue it this last legislative session, but we can consider it for the coming session, certainly.
I think that gives a higher level of certainty to it, and the governor has been known to change his mind on what he vetoes. So maybe this time around, he'll let it go through. But I think that, like the Rolling Center and with some other things, so.
That takes political contributions.
So they've been writing about it.
But I think that's worth another shot.
It's something I think the legislative committee should talk to our lobbyists about and evaluate.
Especially if it passes, then I don't think there's any reason not to.
Yeah.
There are some other good reasons to do that as well. And we've just started drafting the interlocal agreement. I raised some issues with Brad about the bonding capacity and how that's all the issues might affect the bonding capacity. So there's some other good issues to do that as well.
Okay, thanks.
Your legislative committee on that.
Last but not least is the idea that the rail will require us to actually reduce or not come through with our plans to increase and enhance the bus system in Pinellas. And that did happen back in the 1980s, some 25 years ago, in LA, in Los Angeles. There was reductions in some bus service, especially to low-income areas, and while they were building many of their rail lines that they now have. And there was a lawsuit that was identified a consent decree on the LA MTA that now, and even up to today, the LA MTA has to get a judge to approve of every service change and fare change and everything like that to ensure that they are not in any way harming certain neighborhoods in Los Angeles. And that went actually all the way up to the Supreme Court and was upheld. But so because of that case in Los Angeles, you can't do that anymore. And clearly we're not planning on doing that. That's why we did the complete bus study. We have a comprehensive new revenue scenario that adds 65% more bus service, not less bus service. And we need to stay consistent with that plan, and FTA has a whole process in place to ensure that you're not doing what LA did 25 years ago. And that sort of thing. We have, over the last 2 months, been working to look at other cities and what other cities have done to be accountable for their project implementation and implementation of their plans, especially those cities, but all communities, especially those cities that have had referendum. And we have identified some best practices. Those are 3 things. 1, maintain a detailed website to try to make, it has to be simple but detailed, which are sort of the oxymorons, but a website that you can get all the information easily and that anyone can access. Number 2, to have oversight councils, but they're ongoing and they help us implement the plan or make changes to the plans, as you mentioned before. And number 3 is that the outreach, that the multiple outreaches we're doing per week now pretty much never end or can never end. We constantly have to be touching the community and getting feedback from the community to how we're doing and how the plans are working and how the transit is affecting them. Maybe there needs to be changes. This complicated chart shows a number of other examples of places we checked, including Pinellas County, the Penny for Pinellas. The Penny for Pinellas is known for having its beautiful signs out at the different projects and having a very nice website that lists progress and the listing of all the different projects that are being implemented with the penny for Pinellas. But there are other examples out there listed: Los Angeles, Orange County, California, Maricopa County, Charlotte, Seattle, Denver are listed there. We checked some others. But the other idea is, of course, having a project schedule, like a Gantt chart that shows progress along the way, a funding plan, an early action plan is, I think, an interesting idea, that we would publish a separate document that would take, say, what new and improved services can be expected in the first, say, 3 to 5 years of the plan. Of course, audits and reports, and we've talked about maybe even increasing our level of sophistication with our auditing in the future, and then having a citizen oversight committee. I'll just show you, we looked at different websites, different features of websites like the Penny for Pinellas has. The oversight councils, what I'm suggesting that we do is actually ultimately create 2 committees, 2 citizen committees that would both report to the PSTA board, to you. There would be one committee that would mandate, it would have to have members, you would have to be a regular rider of PSTA. This would be a reconstituted TAC committee. We would not have the current TAC committee, but we have a new committee that would just be riders, and you would have to ride. And the benefit of being on this committee is you would be able to provide input on the operational activities of riding the bus, or riding any future mode, or riding DART. And the benefit, or the reason how we get people to come, unlike Safety Harbor on Monday, was by giving them a free bus pass, an annual free bus pass. Now, in order to allow this to be a diverse group that stays vibrant, there would be term limits, 1 or 2 years maybe max, where you would be able to get an unlimited free rides on the PSTA bus, possibly also incentivize people to show up with food. And but you would be on this committee and you'd be able to weigh in on the operations of the system. The second committee would be non-riders, civic, but community leaders that would oversee the implementation of the plan, and that would probably emerge out of this Greenlight council process we're doing now, which by definition has representation from business, civic, and government leaders. We create a committee like that would continue on, or at least have representation, diverse representation like that does. And that would be appointed, and that would oversee probably more of the longer range capital plans and the overall implementation, and less so much on the operating policies and procedures of PSTA. So those are the 2 committees. Again, in the referendum language, at least, which you will ultimately, hopefully approve and then recommend to the county, there doesn't seem, from our research and talking to people in the other communities, most of them don't believe that that had an effect on with the voters. It doesn't seem to have, the language of having a citizen oversight committee doesn't seem to have a substantial impact, at least in other communities, on how the general public thinks. But everyone says that they are helpful in actually implementing your plans moving forward. Oh, and then finally, just the ongoing outreach. That seems to be a very important aspect, is to continue to touch base with the community, do polling on how they see the Transit Authority implementing the plans, continuous public speaking, etc. So again, it's an information item for you today. We're working on developing those recommendations I just listed in writing. The devil will be in the details, obviously, on exactly how the website looks. We haven't done anything on that yet. We are talking about suspending of the current Transit Advisory Group, the TAC, having one more meeting, but it has lost its chair, and so it's a good time to maybe look at a reconstituted TAC anyway, and then start it up again, probably with this other active civic and government committee in January. Any questions on that?
Brad, on some of your earlier slides with how communities have dealt with the overruns, several years ago, Tugarda did it to Dallas, Denver, Charlotte. I think it was Dallas that literally was a spoken hub all going to the center of the city, and as the cost overruns were realized in phase 1, 2, 3, 4, there was less and less money, and they didn't complete the circle, which didn't go well with the voters on phase 4 and 5. And I can't remember if it was Charlotte or Denver to make sure that didn't happen, gave each of those phases a fixed amount of money to operate within. Problem with that one was, as ridership increased, there wasn't money to expand the system. And I can't remember if it was Denver or Charlotte, but they built 60-foot platforms for the trains based on 2 cars. When the ridership increased, you couldn't put a 3rd car on because you needed a 90-foot platform, and there wasn't capital money because it was going to the next phases. Have those things been addressed, or that's something we can look at as to, we've got less of a phasing with this part,
Right.
but will there be opportunities to, after the system is up and running, look at where expansion can happen or where it's needed? I know some of the park and ride facilities weren't sufficient because the ridership was greater than needed. Things like that, that assumptions either the ridership is greater or less, the opportunity to adjust the system once it's become a little more realized.
Certainly, at this stage, the answer to your question, I think, is yes, there will be opportunities to adjust and manage the system. Like you said, there's going to be changes in development patterns about Rockingham Field or other developments that might come online between now and implementation that we'll need to respond to. Certainly, demand will change on the number of parking spaces if a different kind of use of the land emerges different than it is now, and we will have to respond to that. I think you might be talking about Charlotte, which is a little bit different in that they devised a master plan for their entire county with multiple lines going to each location. And Ms. Hamilton remarked on or read that article about an area that I know because when I got there, since I had worked for a rail before, they put me as a project manager on the rail that she's talking about with that mayor from Huntersville, who I don't know, is complaining about not getting done. And when we talked about, I remember, we were going to implement the rail to that city in that corridor first, without any federal money, because we had lots of money at the beginning of the project. But then those cost overruns on the other corridor started coming up, and we decided to not implement that. And so that mayor, no doubt, and that whole community is feeling like they have been left behind because they haven't gotten theirs yet, and they were promised. We're in a different situation. We do have our alternative analysis complete and a financial plan that covers the plans we're proposing. We have to deal, as Mr. Dyton mentioned, with the Howard Franklin Bridge, and we are trying to work with FDOT on that. That funding is not included in our plan. But I think that is less of a concern as far as phasing. And of course, once this gets implemented, I think that will have an effect on what happens over in Hillsborough County and other places, and things will change again. So.
Thank you. I had a member of our staff look at this, and one of his comments was, it's really a presentation that goes along with some verbalization from somebody that's not a standalone document. So I'm really thrilled that we're going to convert it into a standalone written document that is understandable independently. In doing that, on the best practices summary chart, I forgot, although I've seen this several times, that the column that says Pinellas is penny per Pinellas. And if we're going to do any future presentations, it might be useful to say penny per pinellas at the top of that, rather than implying that it's this project, because we're already going to do some of the things that are not circled below
Right.
on that. And I was wondering if you talked about citizens oversight and doing that in a certain way, talked about the early action plan, and you mentioned the audits and reporting. Are we also going to do some visible project scheduling? And as one of the best practices?
Yes, well, yeah, this doesn't, you're right, this chart doesn't include our project.
Right.
But you're right.
Good.
Yes, and actually, just, there is actually a document in place, I have, and I will certainly send to you, of the consultant work in that documented the best practices that we got all this information from. That is already in place.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Brad? Brad,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I missed the committee meeting. I'm just looking at I go to the Transit Advisory Committee meeting.
I know.
And I can understand your kind of frustration with them. We seem to hear the same things from them. But I think it's the only place where we hear comments from the people who really have got their tushes in the seats. And so I like the idea of having, replacing them, maybe with new faces and so forth. But I just wondering how you envision giving these people advisory role in the operating budget. So that seems like a rather complex thing for our riders to tackle. And maybe the same thing with the capital investment projects as well. Are these going to be simplified, or are these going to be expected to go through line by line, the way the finance committee does?
Well, no, I think it's at least my idea to make sure we have a wider group that is weighing in on decisions that affect the operations, including the operating budget, but it has to be presented in a way that they can understand. I mean, we have a number of discussions at this body and at the committees about how we pick up trash, how we, fares and the Wi-Fi on the buses and things like that, we would love to, it would be great to have input on. And then I think it would be great for the chair to come and make recommendations to you as the PSTA board, so that you hear from the riders group. That hasn't happened with the current TAC. And maybe that just requires a different chair. Maybe the rider group needs to meet at night, like the MPO citizen group does or something. We'll have to kind of work with it to see how we can make it most effective. But although we're eliminating the TAC in its current format, we don't want to lose that. Yeah.
I'm making an assumption that the committee, the writers committee, I mean, wouldn't we as a board get, and you as staff, wouldn't the best types of things for them to talk about are what affects them as they're writing? You know, the routes they're taking, the comfort of the transportation they're taking, the conditions of the transportation mode, or the bus stops, or the hubs, or the transfers, or where the bus stops are located physically on a particular corner. I mean, those are the kinds of things that you want to hear from your writers.
Right. Right.
Those are the kinds of things you're going to have them look at, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, Brad. Next item, Reports and updates?
First, I wanted to thank Commissioner Rice for leading our Greenlight Pinellas Civic Committee. There was also a Greenlight Pinellas Business Committee that met 3 times this summer, and those meetings, as she mentioned, went very, very well. And Mr. Thompson mentioned that as well. That process of outreach moves on now to a Greenlight Council that I just mentioned. That is a group of 9 members that will be meeting, at least tentatively, on September 25th, to report out from the business, civic, and government leaders on what they have heard from their parts of the community. Again, that's another element of public outreach. It's not a governing body. It's not a body with any authority. It is another way that citizens can provide input. And so that has gone very well. And last but not least, I want to brag, but in a very nice way, although she's gone, in a politically correct way to Sarah, that Heather Stobush back there is going to be joining the PSTA staff, coming by way of the Pinellas MPO starting next week.
Wow.
Yeah, so I'm thrilled about that, and I'm grateful to Sarah for not letting us. Not going
What will you
crazy.
be doing?
She will be working with Cassandra in our planning. Yeah, and many more.
Okay, and you've seen the packet, the future meeting subjects and other business, including changing the date of our November and December meetings. Board member comments, Assembly Vice Mayor Murders.
No comments.
Thank you. Commissioner Barkley.
Well, this is a very good meeting. We've had a lot of good discussion. I appreciate the discussion from the audience participating. And glad we've got some major issues resolved. And I'm looking forward to moving forward with
Mr. Long?
Just to say that I'm really thrilled to be here on this committee, on this board, and I'm excited about moving forward and looking forward to being able to take advantage of our new transportation